There will be people, perchance listeners, who may instinctively regard the idea of protests in New Zealand as some combination of absurd, outrageous, even insulting. What, after all, could New Zealanders possibly have to complain about? Their country is rich, orderly, beautiful, and secure in its own expanse of ocean. It is basically Australia without the worst things about Australia, i.e. the spiders.
And the Australians.
Thanks, Anna. Get back to work. Nevertheless, a throng of some 40,000 people gathered earlier this week outside New Zealand's Parliament building in Wellington, the culmination of a 9-day yomp across the country, a style of protest march known by New Zealand's Maori people as a hikoi, and they were not doing this for fun. At issue, as the protesters see it, is an attempt to kick away one of the founding pillars upon which this lavishly blessed nation has been built. Last week, Maori MPs announced their objections with a haka on the floor of the House of Representatives. An extremely brief catch-up is probably in order, with due advance apology that summarising nearly 2 centuries of history in a paragraph or so is going to necessitate the omission of certain nuances. Circa the mid-17th century, Europeans realised that New Zealand was there. First the Dutch, then the British. As was the case with Australia, the Dutch decided that it was all too hard, or there were too many spiders, or the landscape was ill-suited to clogs, or whatever, and left it to the Brits, who ran up their flag and acted like they owned the place, as was the style at the time. However, very much unlike they did in Australia, the British negotiated and concluded a legal agreement with the people who were already living on what the Dutch had called Nova Zelandia and what the British navigator James Cook anglicised to New Zealand. The Treaty of Waitangi, the subject of this week's protests, was signed in 1840 by the Royal Navy Captain William Hobson, who became the first governor of New Zealand, and several hundred chieftains of New Zealand's indigenous people, the Maori. While it does basically declare that Britain fully intended to help itself to New Zealand, the treaty did extend rights and protections to the Maori. The treaty did not solve everything. Indeed, certain infelicities in translation from English to the Maori language led to sputtering conflict between 1845 and 1872. New Zealand's 4th largest city, Hamilton, is named for the Royal Navy Captain John Hamilton, commander of the corvette HMS Esk. He was killed as the British were soundly beaten at the Battle of Gatipa in 1864. And in the century and a half since the wars concluded, the Treaty of Waitangi has not resolved every tension between the descendants of the colonisers and the descendants of the colonised. But it has provided, via the Waitangi Tribunal, established in 1975, a framework via which such difficulties can be addressed. Enough, as a few irritable Conservative voices see it, of that. This week's protests have been prompted by a bill put before New Zealand's Parliament by ACT, a small and often somewhat cranky libertarian party which forms part of New Zealand's current governing coalition. The Treaty Principles Bill would, as ACT professes to see it, redefine the Treaty of Waitangi in a fashion that encourages equality rather than emphasises difference. The rhetoric of David Seymour, ACT's leader, and a creditable 5th place getter in the 2018 series of New Zealand's Dancing with the Stars, may sound familiar to listeners in certain jurisdictions where populists have prospered by rending their garments, shaking their fists, and demanding to know when, oh when, white people are going to catch a break.
Where in the world is it a good idea to give citizens different rights based on ancestry? Where in the world has that approach been a success?
It is, of course, not impossible that Seymour and ACT are entirely sincere in their desire to see all New Zealanders, whatever their background, whatever their identity, as absolutely equal under the law, and that they only want what's best for everyone. And for what it may be worth, Seymour is of Maori descent himself, and a reminder at this point of an often overlooked fact of political life, which is that there is no earthly reason why people of a particular background would or should think any one way about any one thing. It is also, however, pretty tempting to suspect that Seymour, especially given his rich personal history of contrarian grandstanding, is doing that thing of presenting power as a zero-sum proposition, of suggesting to the suggestible that the rights enjoyed by other people are necessarily at the expense of their own. The participants in the recent Hikoi fear, probably not without reason, that this is not just about ACT's Treaty Principles Bill. The bill's chances of passing through Parliament and becoming law are precisely zero. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon has confirmed as much. But those who marched in the Hikoi suspect that it may represent a first exploratory shove of a looming effort to topple a consensus many arduous decades in the building. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.